Okay. The second video in the series, the first video, I talked about the tool MSW Lens, and which that tool you can use really for any kind of front end application, and it adds on top of the great mock service workers library. This tool, the Stellar Devtools, this is specific for Angular. And I do a lot of Angular development, and we've been using Angular did a lot of the Redux stuff back when that was the hip cool kid thing to do in the React days, and the NGRX team created the NGRX store. It was such a faithful reproduction of the Redux pattern, the Redux experience, that we could actually hook into the browser dev tools, the Redux dev tools, and use those to see what's going on with your application. Now that Angular has almost completely moved to signal based as opposed to the RX based stuff, though that's still there if you need it. But the signal based stuff, the NGRX team created NGRX Signal Store. And I know in a lot of my code, there is a predominance of using the Signal Store. I've basically migrated almost everything I've had in the NGRX store to the Signal Store, especially since they've added the events functionality, which kind of gives you the best of all worlds. I'm a big fan. And the good folks at the Angular Architects, Reiner and all those people, they created a little plugin so you can still use the old Redux dev tools, but it was just like one more step into uncanny valley for me. In other words, it was already weird installing Redux dev tools to use the NGRX store. There's some little buttons and knobs in the dev tools that don't really make sense when we're in an Angular environment. And then when we went to Signal Store, it just becomes much more obvious that what we needed is some more dev tools. So that's what this tool does. So you can go read about this at stellar hypertheorylabs.dev. I have a nice little page, lots of documentation, another little demo here. Lots of talk about my thoughts as I built this, because a lot of what this turned into actually was thinking about how to use AI at development time. And one of my big insights during this was I'm building this DevTools thing. And what do we use DevTools for? We use DevTools for usually either figuring out what's going on in our application, what's happening to the state, in our application with various, state transitions, all that kind of stuff, or something's really going wrong, right? And we need to peer inside. And started creating a nice graphical user interface where you can see the diffs between states and all that kind of stuff. And then it dawned on me, what I want to be able to do is give whatever LLM, whatever AI assistant I'm using, access to what I'm seeing, right? So AI could create a nice user interface where I could see what's going on. But if it can't see that kind of stuff, it's not going to be very helpful. So I was frankly just kind of vibe coding this, but the big transition was, what if I made AI the primary consumer, right? What if I said, hey, Claude, hey, GPT, what would you like to see here if you were helping me deal with a problem? And that's where this ended up. So we get kind of both worlds. We can see it as humans and we can do this. By the way, there is another URL on this, which is stellar-demo hypertheorylabs.dev. And these are a bunch of demonstrations and walkthroughs on how to use this. So link back to the documentations. Here's the counter stuff, user logged in, user logged out, etc. Example of an outbox pattern, working with the NGRX event stuff, how that might work. So for a more detailed overview, one of the big things that we decided, and I literally am saying me and the AI I was working with, is the AI said, hey, if you're going to hand me data and real data from an application, and that data comes from an API and could be actual production data, we can't make sanitation of that data an optional thing, right? So there's another little library that gets installed along with this, which is the sanitation library, and it does mostly sanitation by convention. So if it finds some data in the UI that is like, looks like a secession token, it will emit it. We can redact things for pin codes. It'll mask it in the output, and you can actually parameterize these as well. So you can use these. You can extend what this is doing if it can't figure out what's going on with your data. Um, there's some hints here. Well, look at this. This is the AI collaboration thing. I'm going to give you a couple of these as we go. And this was a little thing about, providing services through at the root level, at a route, and at a component. Just a little, actually it was a little bug we had that shows you how this works. So if I go back to basics here, what you may notice is this little thing at the bottom. I'm no longer doing, I didn't think having another little devs tools thing down here was the way to go. I think that was cool for a while. I kind of really like things like the Astro Dev Tools, or View Dev Tools, or the TanStack Dev Tools. So when you're using these dev tools, you just have this little pop up. And what you'll see here is all the stores it encountered as I was going through this application. They're not all going to be present when you get there. So there's the counter store, there's the user store, etc. Those are all examples we're seeing here. The ones that are grayed out are stores that it encountered, probably from this life cycle, definitely from the life cycle tab, that now that I've moved to this page have been taken out of scope, right? I saw these things before, but they're here. If I go back to life cycle, you'll see those light up and it says, oh, these have been created twice, right? So anyhow, if I go to basics and like this little counter, I can click on any one of those stores, right? So we get like a little UI thing here. And if I hit increment and decrement, right, and reset, I get pretty much the old DevTools experience here. I didn't do the tree view or any of that stuff. Just the state and the diff. If anybody wants that, pull requests are, accepted or put in an issue. But there was our initial state. We went to 1, went down, and you can see, these are showing it based on actions, I think, are being dispatched on that. But it'll actually get it from buttons as well. So if I go to like this one, and that is the user store, it's telling me currently Alice is logged in. And if I click log out here, I had to log in first, sorry. So you can see it said, oh, I see they clicked login, right? And what it's doing is to get this, it's actually just pulling that data from that element. It's intercepting the event, pulling that data from that element. So now if I click log out, it knows I'm not using actions here or events, the NGRX Signal Store events, just dispatching these to an actual store. There's the log out, change. They click set name here. There's that. And we have a diff view so you can see what's going on. The other thing you'll see here is this raw. And what this does is if you really want it, it will reveal the unsanitized data. We don't have any sanitized stuff here, but if you really wanted to see it, but that unsanitized data will never be there when we export that stuff for AI. So this is all here for you to play around with. That's live on the internet. Check it out if you would like. In our last video, we were working on this little episodes thing and the forum, etc. And I might have to restart. There we go. I had to refresh this. So what I want to show is the feature I really like of these dev tools is I'm going to click here again and set up dev tools in this project real quickly. So back in VS Code, I already have the npm package installed for this. I won't bore you with this. In package JSON, you can see in my dev dependencies, there's the lens, MSW lens, and I think I accidentally installed these as non-dev dependencies, but you can see I have two libraries here. There's the sanitize and the Stellar NG Dev tools. You don't really need to bring this one in separately. It comes in with this, but I was doing a little experiment here earlier. So the first thing is on your app config, and you can go through and do, only do this if you're in dev mode or whatever, but provide Stellar and there's a couple options here. Um, so there's with HTTP traffic monitoring. So I'm just going to put all the bells and whistles in, but kind of using that extensibility thing. What this is going to do is intercept all HTTP traffic so you can see what's going on with that. And then there's with Signal Store NGRX Signal Store tools as well. So that can give us a little bit of extra stuff, that we can use on this. And then to get that to actually surface the little button to see the tools, though I'll show you later, you don't actually need this. You can just go to a prompt and, run a couple commands and get what you need if all you want is the AI to see this. But if I go to my app.ts here, yeah, maybe right here below the router outlet, I'm going to do Stellar overlay, right? That's the thing that will put the little button on my screen. So now back on this application, if I go to episodes and click on Stellar here, you can see it's got this little watch list store, right? And it knows, okay, we have a list of episodes. So they clicked on episodes. We didn't have anything. Now we have some entities. So this is using the entities thing in NGRX with that data and with that show. So this is working because I actually snuck ahead and on that store, where is that? Yeah, this store, I added a little bit of additional metadata here. So with Stellar Devtools, you give it a name and then you give it a description. You actually have to give it this description or you'll get runtime warnings in your console because, again, a big feature of this is we want to use this so our AI can help us with problems we might have. So this is just you describing it to the AI, right? You can also optionally add the source hint here. So when it gets this information, it will know where this data is coming from. So if we didn't have this, or if I left out description, let me just get rid of that for a second and go back here and maybe open up my DevTools. I'm just going to refresh. Watch list store has no description, added description so the AI knows what's going on here. So a little example of, including the AI as a first class persona in this stuff. So, we get all that. We get the little Stellar Dev tools, all that kind of stuff. That HTTP tracking thing just gives you this. Oh, we did a GET request to API shows. We got a 200. We did another one or to episodes, another one to shows. If I come in here and click on one of the, I did a patch when they clicked on input, right? But all that's going to show up in your store as well. So if I go to that watch list store, right? When I click, there's that input. I click the input. I could look at what that did. Oh, it marked one of the episodes in the entity map 103 as watched. It went from false to true, right? So pretty cool. So all these things, you can hit this little copy to AI thing. And if I do that, I'll just show you. I'm not going to do it this way, but I'll show you maybe in Visual Studio Code. I'll just paste that in. So it's telling you what this is, or you paste this to your AI. So this is what was captured. This is the route. This is what happened. There's the store, the state. So this would give your AI its view of what's going on, including the last state transitions, all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. I'm just going to close that, not save it. The one I like to use mostly is maybe what I'll do is go back here and on Stellar, I'm going to tell it to record, right? So it's going to record what I'm doing. And I think the HTTP is coming from this forum thing. All right. I was a little confused, but I'm going to go to episodes. So hit record here, go to episodes, and maybe I'll add a thing in here like shrinking 2026 Apple, just kind of run through this a bit. And I'm going to mark that episode as watched and both of these. So they're shrinking, etc. And then when I hit stop and export, um, so the first thing it's going to do is show you, the human being, what happened. The top row here is the triggers, probably going to get a bad accessibility on the uh, uh, contrast here. Maybe I'll fix that. The triggers, what happened. So, oh, they clicked on the label episodes, and what became of that was it looks like two HTTP calls there, and that's a timeline, right? So these were really quick because it's actually coming from mock service workers. But there was an API call to API shows, and there was another one simultaneously to API episodes. You got 200 back. A quick little look here at what changed on the state if you wanted to see that. And then you remember I went to that page, and the next thing I did is I added a new thing. So that was a post, right, to shows, and I got a 201 back. This was where I did the patch to mark one as watched, et cetera, et cetera. So you see all that stuff, and it kind of shows you over time what happened. And you can hit the export, which will just download it as a file. I'm just going to copy that for AI and show you what's in there. So when I go back here, let me just briefly show that. I'm going to paste that in here. Big graph here. This is a Stellar recording. This is the store context. What, Signal Store for the watch list feature owns shows and episodes as separate collections. The Stellar Devtools recording directed causal graph of user interactions. So that graph of what we were seeing, this is that graph presented as a way the AI could reason about this, right? It could see what's going on with each one of these things. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use Claude. It's just my preference. It doesn't mean, you can try it yourself. It works good with Gemini, works good with GPT. I just kind of like the vibe of Claude right now. So I'm going to go with that. And hey, looking at this capture, can you tell me some things I might be concerned about with the design of the episodes feature? Oops. So do it in 2 runs. It'll take a little bit because it's got to figure out what's going on here. We might not get as much context here as we want. What you sometimes if it can't really quite figure out what's going on, we'll see what it does. But while it's working on that, there's also this copy all for AI or save for AI, and it's going to show all the stores that come into play. So if I go to this forum, which has some other stores here, right? I don't think I actually hooked those things up, but it would show in there. And if I copy that all from AI here, I'll show you what's inside that. So maybe a new, right? It kind of just shows here's the current state of everything. In other words, what is the whole application right now, the recent history, all that kind of stuff. And what I was saying earlier is even if you're not using the user interface of the DevTools here, if you open this, I think I was recording, that was left over. You can do window dot, there's Stellar DevTools, and it has a describe function, a diff function, a snapshot function, etc. And these are all in the documentation. But if I do describe here, it's going to output an object that I could give my LLM that is what I just showed you, right? So what all the stores are, what are the stores, there's the watch list store, there's that description, how many snapshots have there happened, when was it registered, all that kind of good stuff. And, the data that's in there, et cetera, the caveat, right? This is lazy loaded routes may register additional stores. It adds all that stuff in there and you can do snapshots. So, I always have the temptation, like, I don't want to necessarily take this out when it's in production, but I don't want that in production, but this would let me get at the data if I was having a production error. So kind of a secret backdoor. And it's good because everything's going to be sanitized by default. So let's see what Claude came up with here. Yeah, it looks good. So it's saying, wow, came up with a lot. Here's two concerns I'd raised based on the recording and the source code. Episode endpoints load the whole world on mount, right? Oh, that's pretty good, right? It doesn't do it. Two parallel loads, one join view, no in between state. Optimistic toggle with no reconciliation. Toggle has no debounce or in flight guard. The temp ID date, the collision waiting to happen. Temp ID is doing that date time now. Probably right on that. That's the little post thing. Uh, I don't think it's a big deal. Um, the orphaned episodes concept, no memoization on the join. It just went through and said what we had, and it said the biggest two for a talk. See, it always knows I'm doing a talk or a video or whatever, so it's a little biased here. It will show that, so we could go through and tell it to deal with whatever episodes we wanted there. Let me close this real quick, not save that, and maybe we could say. Um, like that. It's hyperspacing right now. All right, so it did it. Let's see what we get. I always like to jump back here and make sure it didn't introduce any build errors. But yeah, so boy, it'd be good if we had a little more time so we could see that. So what I'm going to do is, if you watch the last video with this MSW lens, I'm going to make the patch slow here. So you can see it a little better on those, etc. So that gives you an idea of what you can do. It can see what's going on with the application. All sorts of things like there seems to be a couple of nameable use cases in that recording. Adding a show, marking episodes as complete. Anything else for those two and any you find. Well, I think the ability to do stuff like this, I'm just telling it to, hey, look at that recording because in there's some actual use cases and it has access to the actual code. So it couldn't, I've never done this particular example before, but it could look at it and, create me a little document, a little documentation or something like that. So we'll see what it does here. I had to put it with the feature. So source app, watch list. I think it's still writing it here. Like it did it. There's the preview. Here's the flow of how it works, actually looking at the specific code. So it's not just analyzing the code is a static thing. It's looking at specific use cases, things you should know about. Well, how does add a show works? Um, there's no, there's no error, no error toast, any of that kind of stuff. We should probably add that in our last video that was suggested. Toggling an episode's watch state, et cetera, et cetera. So the combination of these two things of the Stellar Devtools and the MSW lens, I might actually give it in this MSW lens. There's this context file, right? I'm going to give it this. I'm going to say, that is great. I'm going to give you some context about the API scenarios here with what you just created. And these scenarios, would you create another markdown with a rough. So if I had Playwright installed, I could just tell it to write some Playwright tests based on the scenarios that we came up with using the mock service worker lens and these actual use cases. And I'm just going to demonstrate this now because I don't want to go through all that and see what it comes up with. So I think the idea that, we have these various scenarios in our mocks folder. And if you skip the earlier video, maybe go back to that. That's a separate tool, but there's episodes and a description of all those episodes and the shows. So you can see like the episodes patch. This is how it's dealing with that patch, etc. And the use case from the data I collected here. Yeah, you can see the scenario list is rich and most of the scenarios are pre-named test classes. I think this kind of work is much better than, kind of the lazy thing. And I'm not going to say I don't do it sometimes, like, AI write tests for me. Right. So here we have a combination of some possible scenarios with the MSW lens. We are expecting we could have some slow results. We want this to be displayed in case of a slow result. We could have some errors, etc. And then using the Stellar Devtools to actually record specific use cases. We're aligning, the user interactions along with possible back end responses and interactions in a way that makes testing much more realistic and kind of getting benefit as we go along. They're tools we can use as we're developing. And then when we get close to what we think is good, the test can be created. So here's the test plan. Maybe I'll open that as a preview here. Pretty extensive test plan. And you can see, you could go through and look at this and say, okay, engage, make this so, write these playwright tests for me. And I think I'll leave that up to an episode of for the viewer. So I hope this helps. Let me know either on the repo or many of you know me, contact me if you have any ideas, any thoughts. Both of these projects are very new. Play with them, experiment with them, give me feedback, send PRs, whatever. But I'm hoping you find these helpful.